Our group was assigned the case study of TJX. So today we'll take a look at our quick agenda. We're going to discuss the cast of characters, the event overview, the issues facing TJX, decisions facing TJX, constraints, ethics, Octave for security measures, and then our team's thoughts. When we researched the TJX data breach, we discovered that this incident was in fact a real one, although the author did change the names and some of the minor details, but overall the case is real. At the time of the breach, TJX was the largest fashion retailer in the US in the off-price segment. The company was ranked 138th in the Fortune 500 with 17.5 billion in sales for the fiscal year ending January 2007. TJX was founded in 1976 and continues to have its headquarters in Framingham, Mass. At the time of the incident, the parent company had 8 individual businesses located globally, which included TJ Maxx, Marshalls, Home Goods, AJ Wright, Bob's Stores in the US, Winter Home Sense in Canada, and TK Maxx in Europe. The quality of the information systems is critical for their company to maintain their margins and stay competitive with their stores so that they lean heavily on technology like kiosks and handheld devices. In this case study, there are 6 groups of individuals who were part of it. The first was the hackers, which were found to be an Eastern European residents and a group from Florida who were part of an extensive fraud group. Among their activities was the creation of white plastic, which is physical cards encoded with a strip and no identifying information. These cards can be used for things like self-checkout and places where there's no human interactions. Next group of the customers. This is a large group that included individuals with transactions dating back to 2002 and had interacted with any of the 8 companies. Some of these were part of the class action lawsuit. Some did not participate in the lawsuit, and it was believed to be 94 million customers. One example was Mary Smith, who had a letter that was included as part of the case study that outlined her experience. The financial institutions were the third group impacted by this. This included those who filed in federal court on behalf of all financial institutions that issued credit and debit cards at the TJX stores at the time of the breach, as well as the payment card industry, which is also known as PCI. This is a group whose members included American Express, Discover, JCB International, MasterCard, and Visa. This organization developed a set of standards, which is known as the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standards, or PCI DSS. The fourth group were the employees, and 2 of whom are mentioned in this case. The first is Owen Reich, who was the chief security officer for TJX. He was newly in the role and previously a CIO of a small Canadian retailer, as well as Vincent George, a manager of customer service who shares a letter that outlines the customer's point of view. There were multiple government agencies that were part of this, including the FBI and the Secret Service. And in fact, the Secret Service assisted in the investigation and was the organization that instructed TJX to not publicly disclose the breach until they completed their investigation, as they feared it would interfere with what they were investigating. Additional government agencies also were investigating the potential violation of consumer protection, both in the US and in Canada. And Jennifer Stoddard is mentioned as well, who is a privacy commissioner in Canada. Lastly, journalists played a large part of this case. This included the Wall Street Journal, who first suggested the break-ins started in 2005, as well as Information Week, who reported a story around USB intrusions. So next, let's talk about the events that occurred. In 2005, TJX wireless networks continued to be encrypted by WEAP, which is known to be a weak form of encryption that holds significant vulnerabilities. Wi-Fi production access, known as WPA, replaced WEAP as the standard 2 years earlier. However, emails from the 2005 show that TJX's CIO continued to postpone the WEAP upgrade, and he thought that it was low risk and it would be a good cost saving measure. In December of 2006, TJX realizes that they've been infiltrated by hackers. Initially, reports from the company say that 46 million people have had their data compromised. However, the lawsuit places the impact at closer to 94 million. The company learned of the hack on December 18th when they found evidence of suspicious software, altered files, mixed up data in areas that handled payment cards, checks, and return transactions. The issues affected all 8 of their businesses, and at that time they called security consultants who 3 days later confirmed that they had in fact had a breach. At that point, TJX notified law enforcement, and the Secret Service advised them to not disclose the breach to the public while the investigation continued, although they did allow them to notify the financial institutions. The investigation showed that TJX systems were hit in multiple ways due to vulnerabilities that included their wireless encryption and the use of USBs in kiosks. There were also violations in the compliance and auditing practices. The Wall Street Journal was one of the first to report that thieves had used equipment aimed at a store laptop in St. Paul, Minnesota, to decode data from store handheld devices at the cash registers. This provided access to the central database. And this equipment, in fact, let hackers capture IP addresses, which were used as gateways to the data systems. They were essentially digitally eavesdropping and capturing valid logins. With these employee logins, they then created their own accounts to the systems. And in fact, the attackers were so bold that they actually left messages to each other in the TJX systems to make sure that they wouldn't duplicate their work. Another publication called Information Week reported that an entry point for the hack had been the USB access to kiosks, where attackers had loaded software into the system. This was a utility that let them control the kiosks that were on the TJX network, and the traffic wouldn't be blocked by the firewalls, as the company had left the USB access available to accommodate the store's need for devices like printers and mice. On February 17, 2007, TJX publicly announces the timing and the scope of the hack. And at that time, they had more details, which actually showed that the attackers had first entered the systems in July of 2005. This was followed by additional attacks in 2005, and again from May of 2006 to January of 2007. TJX also confirmed that there was no additional customer data that had been stolen since December 18, 2006. Over the summer of 2007, several class action lawsuits were filed across multiple states and in federal courts, as well as multiple provincial Canadian courts. These suits were filed on behalf of the customers who had data compromised, as well as a case on the behalf of the financial institutions. On September 21st, 2007, TJX settles a customer class action lawsuits where they were given all those customers affected 3 years of credit monitoring as well as identity theft coverage. They also reimbursed the cost of replacing driver's license, as well as offering a 3-day customer appreciation event where they reduce their prices. This case study set in November of 2007, and at this point, Rachel, the chief security officer, has 2 priorities that he needs to address. A short-term one, which is to understand the failure points and tighten and improve the security systems, as well as a long-term, which is to minimize the future risks so that this kind of intrusion never happens again.
Let's look at the issues and decisions TJX faced and tackled in response to this hacker data leak. The NIST stands for National Institute of Standards and Technology, and SANS stands for Sysadmin Audit Network Security. These are simply 2 different types of cyber incident security frameworks by which we can evaluate TJX's response to this incident. NIST and SANS are essentially the same in terms of outlining incident response. The only difference being SANS separates containment, eradication, and recovery into 3 different steps. The first is preparation. Preparation is the organization's aim to prevent incidents such as this from happening. It includes precautionary measures and risk assessments of this outline of cybersecurity incident response. While the data was encrypted before it was stored, later investigations would reveal that the intruders had access to the decryption tool. If TJX had taken the time to upgrade from WEP prior to this incident, the data that the hackers acquired through skimming the credit card payments would be entirely unusable to them. However, failure to upgrade left the hackers with countless details to customers' credit and debit card information. There were no existing measures taken to restrict wireless access to its networks, allowing hackers to decode data streaming between handheld devices and store computers. They also failed to restrict access between the computer and the internet. The kiosk had USB ports in the back, which allowed hackers to download software into what was essentially a doorway to the company's IT system, and the firewall wasn't strong enough to defend the system, so hackers were able to load software through a USB at the back of these unprotected store kiosks. One of the major failures was storing consumer data for far too long, which is a violation of the payment card industry data security standards. These standards are an attempt by credit card companies to employ security measures, and TJX's failure to comply in this left many of its customers at risk. Moving forward, let's talk about detection and analysis. This is the company's ability to detect changes in their systems that could indicate cybersecurity threats. Shockingly, it took TJX over 18 months to identify the breach by an unknown amount of intruders. According to Medium.com, and Michael Maloof, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Trigo Network Security, TJX did not have the log data needed to do proper forensic analysis of the incident. Because they didn't store log data, they failed to see the tracks left behind by the computer intrusion. It was later revealed that 66% of victims had evidence available within their logs to discover the breach had they analyzed their resources closer. Going into containment, eradication, and recovery, in an attempt to contain the situation, TJX chose not to inform its customers, preventing further attacks on its system, while they worked to eradicate and recover from the incident. While TJX failed to comply within the first few steps of these cybersecurity outlines, the decisions they made following the incident were good. TJX appointed a new cybersecurity officer to identify administrative, technical, and physical safeguards the company could take to prevent future attacks like this. The cybersecurity officer would also certify the program was operating efficiently every year. TJX would also go forward to pay to settle the issues that arose from their failure to protect the credit card information. They also went forward to prove to attorneys of multiple states that the IT systems they now employed would be secure and pay restitution to the affected customers. This data breach totaled up to $250 million by the time it was over.
Now, considering constraints, there are a few different legal and regulatory limits that bound the decision in this case study. First, the company must comply with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which sets forth standards for public companies in the United States and requires them to maintain accurate financial records and disclose any material events that could impact the company's financial condition. The second is the company must also comply with the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, which sets forth standards for companies that process credit card payments. Third, the company must also comply with the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which sets forth standards for financial institutions in the United States and requires them to maintain confidentiality of customer information. Finally, the company must also comply with California Consumer Privacy Act, which sets forth standards for businesses that collect and process the personal information of California residents. Now, what information must the decision be made without? The company must also make decisions without certain information. For example, the company does not know the full extent of the data breach, so it must make decisions about how to respond without knowing the full extent of the damage. Additionally, the company does not know the identities of the hackers or their motivations. So it must make decisions about how to respond without knowing who is responsible or why they hacked the company. Now, going on to the second part, that is ethics. Now, who will be benefited or suffered from certain decisions? There are three groups of people. First is shareholders, customers, and employees. So, first, the shareholders of company will benefit from certain decisions that protect company's stock price and reputation. Second, customers of the company will benefit from decisions that protect their personal information and prevent them from being victimized by fraud. Finally, the employees of the company will benefit from decisions that protect their jobs and prevent them from being laid off. Now, who will suffer? These are the three groups of people who will suffer again. That is, for example, the shareholders of the company will suffer from the decisions that result in the company's stock price dropping or the company's reputation being damaged. Second, the customers of the company, the customers will suffer that result in their personal information being leaked or their accounts being hacked. Finally, the employees of the company will suffer from decisions that result in them being laid off or their jobs being outsourced. Now, what guidance or precedents or examples are available to model the decision? Now, there are a few different sources of guidance. First, the company can look to the above acts which I mentioned, that is the Payment Card Industry Data Act, Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, and the California Consumer Privacy Act for guidance on how to comply with various legal and regulatory requirements. Second, the company can look to other companies that have experienced data breaches, such as Target and Home Depot, for guidance on how to respond to and recover from a data breach.
And now let's talk about how other security planning methodologies would have changed the decision-making process within TJX throughout these many years. One that can really be seen for is Octave, which stands for the Operational Critical Threat Asset and Vulnerabilities Evaluation. This system could have helped TJ Maxx in both the information security department and the management department. Within the security department, the Octave would have given them three phases for a vulnerability assessment. These phases being the build asset-based threat profile phase, the identify infrastructure vulnerabilities phase, and the develop security strategy and plan phase. These three phases that Octave uses for assessing the vulnerabilities within a system would have greatly helped TJX before and even during the security breaches, as throughout these phases, the unseen vulnerabilities would have been detected and would have given a company a multitude of ways to either mitigate these potential issues or solve them completely. The installation of Octave would have definitely steered TJX into a different direction, as if any of the vulnerabilities could have been patched and solved on site, the need for radical upgrades may have not been as necessary as it was for TJX in the first place. Octave could have also helped bridge the gap between the information security team and the managers and higher ups. This can be done by compiling all of the security issues within the company into a neat and cohesive security strategy that can be read by both the information security team and the manager. This allows for more communication and more equal level discussions that can be had between the two teams and allow them to come to conclusions quicker. This will also allow managers to make decisions based on actual data and actual security plans than spending precious time on trying to figure out what the vulnerabilities are and where to go from there. as once those plans reached the manager's table, the security team would have already had many ideas on what to do to solve these issues instead of seeing who has been affected and trying to decide which people they should have informed on such issues. These quick decisions and having a cohesive plan that can be read by all will also allow the company to focus more time on making the right decisions after attacks and have the correct protocol to follow. Octave will allow management and information security to focus their resources on the correct issues and prepare for any further attacks on their current vulnerabilities.
When discussing this case, our team had several thoughts on what decisions could have been changed or additional measures that could have been taken. First, we all agreed that WEAP had not been used as a standard since 2003, and it should have been upgraded sooner. If the company had moved to WPA, this would have addressed one of the means that the attackers used for the breach. In addition to the WEAP upgrade, the company had multiple opportunities to lock down weak points in both their hardware, software, and processes. For example, there's no reason that USB ports on the kiosks shouldn't be secured. Additionally, the company was not adhering to purge policies, and they held plain text credit card information in the database. This allowed more people's data to be at risk. Firewalls could have been enforced, and most importantly, there should have been robust training for employees that would have reinforced things like not leaving your equipment unattended and insecure, as well as not connecting your personal devices to the network. Additionally, records showed that TJX had not met 9 of the 12 PCI requirements for encrypting and as well as access control and firewalls, even though they passed their audits. Auditors had completely missed the lack of network monitoring, the absence of logs, the presence of unencrypted data on the system, as well as the fact that the company was retaining data well past their purge policy. Improved auditing practices would have helped uncover the issues sooner, and they would have been resolved prior to the attack. Regarding whether or not TJX should have disclosed the hack sooner, we had sort of a split opinion because we could see both the business side and the customer perspectives. From a business perspective, we saw the value in waiting to disclose the attack. This allowed them to complete the investigation. If they had disclosed it sooner, they would have essentially been broadcasting the attack, allowing them to have even more individuals exploit their vulnerabilities and potentially posing greater risks for the customers. However, we also saw the customer's perspective, and by not disclosing it, the customers were at a higher risk. If they had been aware sooner, people might have taken precautions with their accounts to protect themselves and would not have suffered the consequences that Mary Smith talked about in her email.